To the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those that trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. I don't play videos.
I thought you saw it here. This house is in session. Minutes for the meeting held on Tuesday, 1st December 2020 to be deferred.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that the aforesaid minutes be deferred.
The question is that the aforementioned minutes be deferred. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Meeting, the ayes have it. The aforementioned minutes are deferred.
Announcements by Your Honor the Speaker. Messages from Her Excellency the Governor General. Petitions, papers.
Honorable member St. Michael's. Honorable member St. Michael's self.
Sorry, sir. Mr. Speaker, sir, I'm commanded to lay before this honorable place the annual report and audited financial statement of the Barbados Port Inc. for the financial year ended March 31, 2018, and the annual report and the audited financial statement of the Barbados Port Inc. for the financial year ended March 31, 2019.
Government notices, private members' notices, notices of questions. No, you can recommit one. Reports from select committees, first readings of bills.
Honorable Leader, Government Business.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the first reading of the Barbados Humanitarian Service Award Bill 2020, as well as to move the first reading of the Anti-Corruption and Anti-Terrorism Agency Bill 2020.
Beg, second that.
The question is that the aforementioned bills be read a first time. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it.
Statements by ministers, congratulatory and/or obituary speeches, personal explanations, motions for leave of absence, oral replies to questions, notices of motions for the adjournment of the House on matters of urgent public importance, orders of the day.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the suspension of standing orders 6, 16, 18, 20, 42, subsection 5, 43, and 44 be suspended for the remainder of today's sitting.
I beg for second.
The question is that the aforementioned standing orders be suspended for the remainder of the day's sitting. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. The aforementioned standing orders are hereby suspended for the remainder of the day's sitting.
Government business.
Government business is the order of the day.
Order number 1, in the name of the Honorable Minister of Agriculture and Food Security to move the second reading of the Pesticides Control Amendment Bill 2020.
Honorable Member for St. Philip South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this speech today I wish to commend to you and this honorable chamber the amendment to the Pesticides Control Bill 2020. It reminds me, sir, of my days as a primary school boy when you come early in the afternoon and nobody is sure about how the wicket will play, so you're asked to open the batting. And invariably that is the time when you get to bat for the whole day and perhaps score 100. I have had, in my days as a primary school boy, about 300s under such circumstances. But I never excelled beyond then. There were quite a few. I don't remember all of them, but there were quite a few because in those days we played cricket with every given opportunity. Mr. Speaker, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. And this is a common saying that originated from a famous Chinese proverb. The quotation is from chapter 64 of the Tao Te Ching, ascribed to Lao Tzu, although nowadays we also ascribe this to Confucius. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Agriculture and Food Security, when I went there in 2018, had a tremendous amount before it in order that we may, one, reach our transformational goals, and two, at the same time, empower and enfranchise Barbadians. This, sir, called for a fair amount of strategic planning. And in so doing, there are a number of things that remain outstanding over prolonged periods, and in some instances, more than 2 decades. Such, Mr. Speaker, was the situation at the ministry. And we had to then arrange and prioritize how we would address this situation, given the fact in some instances, sir, and I must be very clear, but at the same time, I want to be as candid as possible where this is concerned. The Ministry of Agriculture previously would have had Ministry of Agriculture, Water Resource Management, or Ministry of Agriculture Rural Development. Those attachments, sir, gave rise to a focus on some social developments that needed to take place in Barbados, and indeed shrinking a gap between the haves and the have-nots. And so therefore you will find that many ministers in the Ministry of Agriculture with the additional responsibility for either water resource management or rural development would have focused a lot on those additions so that we can bring the country along, achieve the stated social objectives, whilst at the same time manage agriculture. And that, sir, contributed in a large way to a number of the gaps that were created in agriculture, where one may easily argue that agriculture at many times was left to go adrift. And that has to be stated, sir, because for the first time in all my existence, and certainly for the first time where I have been following politics, and I started as a little boy in 1971. And I have seen a prime minister deciding clearly that the Ministry of Agriculture should carry food security, and its focus should be on the development of agriculture and food security in Barbados, and that we will bring along the farmers in this country and make agriculture once and for all viable, but equally a sector where people will be drawn to it, and that we can at the same time create new opportunities for people in agriculture. And that has to be reinforced, Mr. Speaker, sir, because at the end of the day, what we are doing is that we are righting a number of wrongs over, as I said, could be as long as 2 decades. Some may argue there may be more. Mr. Speaker, if you drive around Barbados now, you would see that right along the countryside, there are many vacant lots, several acres of land, Mr. Speaker, overgrown by bush. You will also see, Mr. Speaker, that there are some plantations where the husbandry is not at its best, and while some try, and whilst I know that I am not supposed to call names, Mr. Speaker, if you drive from Halton on your way to Bridgetown, or from Brayton on your way from Bridgetown to Bridgetown, the aesthetics that you see along Edgecombe really is quite pleasing and is a good example for what husbandry and good agricultural practices should be like in Barbados. However, sir, what happened at Edgecombe is that they have committed to getting people with weed whackers to go along and cut along the terrain so that you have this real beautiful, aesthetically pleasing sight compared to others who have chosen to use pesticides as a way out. Mr. Speaker, pesticides contribute in a large way to agricultural success, and we can't rule it out completely. But at the same time, we need to understand how we can strike a balance between the use of pesticides and labor. And that, sir, is perhaps a conversation that we need to have now more than ever. I am sure, sir, when the Minister for the Environment and National Beautification gets to speak about this, he would address the issues with biodiversity. And I'm sure that he would also agree with me that what we've had over the years is a complete decimation of many of the good insects, butterflies and grasshoppers, and those are insects that serve a purpose and form part of our biodiversity, but equally serve to tell us when the ecology is good, sir. You may note that there are periods when you see a lot of white butterflies, and during that period is when the ecology is perhaps at its best. When they start to disappear, you know then that there are other insects or some other kind of pest that is taking over. Mr. Speaker, we also live in a time when there's climate change. And we have had several conversations about climate change. But unfortunately, not enough action was taken prior to now where climate change is concerned. And the fact that we have allowed ourselves to be having yesterday's conversation today is indicative of how we have treated to agriculture in the past. Sir, climate change does not only bring climatic weather conditions where we have either floods or on the other extreme, prolonged droughts. We are also now exposed to various types of crop diseases, animal diseases, pests, all transboundary, simply because when you move goods and when you move plants and when you move animals or animal products, we are now at risk of moving various pests and diseases to our shores. But equally, many of the bad ones that we would not have seen over time or in recent times, sir, will start now to come back so that they can act as predators to destroy the good ones that we need. And sir, this is a situation that confronts us. And therefore, it is necessary for us to have a conversation about the use of pesticides in Barbados, but overall pesticides in agriculture and its impact on the environment, sir. The Pesticides Control Act, Cap 395 of Barbados, is the only proclaimed act that really seeks to manage the use of chemicals in Barbados. And sir, inasmuch as we are signatory to the Basel Convention and the Stockholm Convention, and in recent times, after many years, the Rotterdam Convention, sir, we have only got one piece of legislation that provides complete management. And so therefore, we have had to make the amendments to bring it in line with what is required in order that we can treat to this matter of the use and management of chemicals and pesticides in agriculture in a real meaningful way. Sir, the Act previously allowed for the Deputy Chief Agriculture Officer to be the chairman of the Pesticides Board. So you have your downline who reports to you, the Chief Agriculture Officer, as the chairman of the Pesticides Control Board, but you, the Chief Agriculture Officer, is the one for guiding policy, managing a technical team, which includes your deputy, and at the same time make decisions that your deputy must carry out. But he is the man that is the chairman of the Pesticides Board, so straight away you can see the anomaly. Equally, the Deputy Chief Agriculture Officer is not necessarily always a trained scientist. And he may have to appoint somebody to the board as his nominee. Sir, it would have been a real difficult thing for a Deputy Chief Agriculture Officer to go to the Chief Agriculture Officer and say, I'm appointing you as my nominee to the board, to the Pesticides Board. I think that should have been the other way around. And so therefore, the simple amendment to this bill is to correct that and to allow the Chief Agriculture Officer to become the chairman of the board. And it goes a little further, and I will get into the details of the amendment a little later in my speech. It goes a little further because previously we didn't have established under the Act a registrar for pesticides. And so it was a case of anything goes, and that is something that we needed to correct. So we included an additional clause 3A to make sure that we have a registrar of pesticides, and so therefore that registrar would then be responsible for the maintenance of a register of pesticides. Mr. Speaker, all of us would have heard of the case of Dwayne Johnson in California, where his lawyers successfully argued that the use of Roundup or glyphosate could have been linked to his illness, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and that he was awarded a substantial sum of money in damages, even though over a period of time, successful arguments have been used to reduce the sum that was first awarded. I think he ended up with some 76 million, as opposed to 200 and something million that was at first, awarded. So that straight away, sir, you can see that we are not in normal times, Mr. Speaker, and that once you have established precedent, then you are responsible, and it becomes incumbent on every single jurisdiction to make sure you take the necessary action. 1, to protect people. 2, to protect the environment. 3, to make sure that we are protecting our biodiversity and the ecology. And in so doing, sir, it would mean that you have to have a systematic, structured approach in order to be able to accomplish this. Mr. Speaker, this is why now we are moving to have a real structured pesticides control board that will then seek to manage a lot of what we are seeking to do as it relates to pesticide management in Barbados. Now, I took to Cabinet during the COVID shutdown period a paper that spoke to the controlled use of Roundup or glyphosate in Barbados, and that the Cabinet did agree that we should set out in very clear terms how we are going to manage pesticides in Barbados, and at the same time, how these chemicals will be accessible by the public. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, in reality, we are seeking to make sure that every farmer with a license can still access these chemicals, but that the person who lives, say for example, in St. Philip North or St. Philip South, which is basically part of the agricultural belt of Barbados, or even St. George North, and wants to use these chemicals to spray the backyard rather than a far or hole, then we need to manage that and to make sure that people are not just going into a hardware store or a chemical shop and have access to purchasing these things for home use. To my mind, sir, we have reached a stage where the risk is too great. And so therefore, whilst I understand, because the sugar industry for sure still relies heavily on the use of chemicals, I am not so certain, Mr. Speaker, that we need to have chemicals kept in somebody's kitchen or storeroom at home. The other thing is that the disposal of containers, Mr. Speaker, can create significant problems to the environment, certainly to the aquifer, and indeed, we find that a lot of people dump in our gullies, so that you have these containers being dumped in gullies. And really and truly, all this now needs to be managed and brought under control. In order for us to achieve this, sir, one, we have to get buy-in nationally. That's the first objective. But equally, we also have to get buy-in from all of the farmers in Barbados. And I would just cite an example, if I am to digress just for a moment, to say that I know that at the BAMC, there are several farms that have been returned to increase sugarcane production. And during this current rainy period, a lot of vines overtook the canes. And so you will find that a lot of the cane fields, as you pass them, you will see a lot of vines covering the sugarcane. My view, sir, is that this requires labor. But the common approach to this is to use a cart and a spray can and go through and spray off these fields. Obviously, it's going to take larger quantities of pesticides, sir, in order to be able to combat what has taken place in terms of the large volumes of bush, the vines that would have overtaken the crops. And this then leads to greater quantities of these chemicals going into the soil. And then when you get the heavy rainfall, you get this water running off into the streets with chemical residue, running off into the ocean, which will impact our reefs, our coral reefs, and the fish, and sir, equally into the aquifer. This obviously cannot continue. Mr. Speaker, we need now to launch a very aggressive PR campaign in Barbados if we are to achieve our stated objectives in terms of how we are going to manage the use of pesticides and chemicals in Barbados. And I'm saying this simply because you don't get buy-in by simply bringing an amendment to the act, and you simply don't get buy-in by operating in silos. And so we have to start this conversation in a very structured, very strategically organized way. My view, and we have been discussing all this at the ministry, is that we also have to start in the schools where we educate our school children so that they will have a greater understanding of the dangers involved and the risks to human life when we use chemicals. We also need, sir, to educate farmers who are prepared to take the easy way out by using these chemicals rather than carry the cost, or I should say the initial cost, because the cost is never ending when we're finished. The initial cost of employing labor, sir, to be able to get rid of many of the common things like river tamarind, common things like cowitch, things that have been a complete irritant, no pun intended, to agriculture. And that if we can just start early in the process, and that is the reason why we introduced the climate mitigation subsidy for the sugarcane industry, so that you can incentivize farmers to start practicing good husbandry, and in so doing, return to some labor. And I will be the first to admit that I am one that supports technology in agriculture. I strongly believe that the future of agriculture in Barbados must be built on the use of technology, greenhouses, and indeed freight farms, and that in order for us to be able to drive agriculture and get the scale we need to move to agro-processing in a meaningful way, and not just what we have as a cottage industry, where a person can give you some good sour salt punch, but we don't have scale. Or I can get some good tamarind juice, but we don't have scale. Or we can watch farmers, sir, grow pumpkins in Barbados coming up to independence period, because we know that that is conky season. And by the way, I eat my conkies without raisins. But to a more serious point, sir, you see farmers with pumpkins that they literally have to dump after they, one, can't find enough market space, or two, have to compete with imported pumpkins. And this is only but one example of many that we have in agriculture. Sir, a vibrant agriculture sector must be built around agro-processing. And so therefore, we have to expand, and indeed I wish to be the first to confirm that the BADMC is currently working on a program with the current feed program we have, the Farmers Empowerment and Enfranchisement Drive, which is a program designed specifically for us to reach food security in Barbados, and at the same time empower and enfranchise Barbadians of a different age group, so that when many of those who we would use perhaps as a repository of information for the young farmers coming in on board, and I speak to those who are currently in farming but are pretty much on the way out, that in order for us to have a vibrant sector, we then have to have younger people involved, And that is the reason why I say I am the first to agree that this must also be technology driven. But getting back to the point, sir, when you have farms that are open field, meaning that the only way you can do agriculture is through open field agriculture. And I speak to things like sweet potatoes, yams, eddos, sugarcane, king grass is one, and I can't ignore king grass because there's a lot of interest in that as well. That we then have to then face the reality of recognizing how we manage the use of pesticides. And so therefore, the plan is that the hardware store will not sell these things from a shelf to people who walk off the street and want to pick them up. But that in truth and in fact, you have to have a license or certificate to show that you're a legitimate farmer who has been approved to use these pesticides. And I want to reiterate, and I can't underscore enough, the case with Dwayne Johnson, simply because it is important for us to note that whilst it is true we have not had any such case in Barbados, we can't ignore the fact that this gentleman developed non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and it was linked to exposure to glyphosate or Roundup. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, rather than send a tractor with a cart and spray cans for our laborers to hook up on their backs and go through a field spraying, I believe that we have to address this through a more labor-intensive approach that would, one, provide opportunities for people who will not necessarily be able to find a job other than in agriculture. Provide an opportunity for people who are perhaps waiting to be able to move to another level, but has to start somewhere. And therefore, that labor intensity of which I speak is directly related to how we're going to reduce the use of these chemicals, but at the same time be able to benefit from greater agricultural yields. In the past, sir, when I grew up in Clifden and St. Philip, I had the opportunity of going with my grandmother, may God bless her soul, to Guinea Plantation, where she was a member of what they call at the time the gang. And I would have gone with her many times, so she had a designated area that she had to weed. And what she would do is take the cane tops and create a shade for me out of the sun, and I would sit there and watch her weed. Sir, back then, we had less problems with fields being overgrown with bush as they currently are. And equally, sir, we had greater yields. Many of the insects, including the firefly that we hardly see now, were fairly pervasive. The grasshoppers and the locusts and all of those we had. And only out of a conversation that I was having with the Minister for the Environment and National Beautification, he also drew to my attention that we are seeing now less frogs in Barbados. There is also a current mealybug that has appeared in Barbados. I think the name is Streptococcus somavelia. And it is seen at Walker's for sure, but can easily spread. Now what it does, once you have it, it destroys all of the forage. So the moment it appears within the space of, let's say, 48 to 72 hours, you start to see all the grass turning, and it gets drier and drier and browner and browner and browner until it disappears. This bug, sir, can very well be treated with chemicals. But the amount of chemical that you would need, sir, to be able to control this and avoid spread around Barbados will have severe consequences for the environment and for us as a people. And so when I said earlier that the cost is perhaps greater in the long run, I refer to the healthcare challenges that will be created, sir, where we would then have to increase the cost of healthcare in Barbados in order to be able to treat many of the challenges we would have, certainly a number of cases of poisoning. And in speaking to my senior veterinary officer at VetLab, he has already drawn to my attention that many times you have animals who would go out and innocently ingest these chemicals and are brought then for treatment because they're subjected to chemical poisoning. Sir, I think I have said enough to bring context to what we are confronted by in this country. I've been personally doing some research on biodiversity. I think the work that is being done in the EU is a tremendous amount of work that makes very good reading. And at some point in time, I want to invite Barbadians to take the time out to do some reading on the work that they have been doing. Because they have determined, out of several studies conducted between, I think it's 2010 and 2016, that 82% of all the species that we have that contribute to biodiversity are at risk of being wiped out. 82%, sir. That is nothing for us to ignore. And that if I were to check the Barbadian situation, and I'm giving a promise to this honorable chamber that I will do so, I am convinced from where I am and from what I have been able to check in my research that Barbados is probably higher than 82%. So that when we have conversations in Barbados about destroying things that people fear, many times we don't understand what it is we are destroying. And when we use chemicals in order for us to be able to give people the easy way out in agriculture, we then destroy a lot of it. The lizard, I know particularly among females, there's a fear of the green lizard. Well, in that instance, the honorable member for...
Don't take that aside, honorable member. Ignore that aside.
He's citing sparrow.
Ignore that aside.
But the green lizard also contributes to biodiversity. And you ask yourself why we would want to see it disappear altogether. Now, Mr. Speaker, I must say to you, sir, that I started to do some what you call backyard agriculture or backyard farming. So I started to plant things like thyme and parsley and those kind of things, chives. Pretty good at it, I must confess. But it took some adjusting of my schedule to be able to do so. And the one thing that annoyed me more than anything else is when I start to come up in good Barbadian parlance and dig up the soil, I will butt up on a frog under the soil. And sir, that happened over a period of time. Nowadays, I don't see them anymore. And I can tell you that I didn't use any pesticides, but I certainly used a lot of salt. And that probably contributed to getting rid of them. But salt in itself also is a chemical. So that, Mr. Speaker, the amendments to this CAP 395 will be significant in order for us to be able to achieve all of what we are planning in the ministry. And this equally would take buy-in from Environmental Protection Department, where my officers at the ministry and the Environmental Protection Department work together to make sure that we can achieve these objectives. Mr. Speaker, we are also challenged beyond our shores. And it is worthy to note, sir, that the more developed countries, the countries who we rely on, first of all, for the transfer of information or the sharing of information, and two, many of whom we go to import a lot of these chemicals, are way advanced in terms of their management systems and how they treat to the use of these chemicals. But unless you're signatory to the conventions that I mentioned earlier, which is the Basel Convention, Stockholm and Rotterdam Conventions, then you are missing critical information that can run you into a large amount of challenges, sir, when it comes to the use of pesticides. The promotion or shared responsibility among parties using chemicals or pesticides, sir, is one that you only achieve effectively under the Rotterdam Convention. And under that convention, it is compulsory for those countries that are signatory to share information in terms of inputs and equally proper labeling. We are challenged, sir, with some products imported into Barbados that you just see the beer bottle, a label in a language that you do not understand or that most people will not understand. And then the contents are not clearly outlined so that we could very well be using stuff that will not necessarily be used in developed countries. We are also challenged with the fact that because we are not able to share and exchange information, then you will find that what Barbados's requirements are not known to the producers, and so therefore they can't include Barbados when they are setting about to determine what is it that you want, or what is it that you have banned, or what is it you're controlling, so that they would know. Our joining the Rotterdam Convention gives us responsibility then and gives us a chance to be part of all of the annual conventions that include Stockholm, Basel, and Rotterdam. So now that Barbados, for the first time, when the EPD attends the conventions, will be able then to put Barbados's position. Previously, we were not in a position to be able to do so, even though we had a presence at the convention. We can now sit at the table and put Barbados's position, and this is significant, sir. What is more important about it is that there are several things that are being done to manage herbicides and pesticides. And sir, I will seek to list a couple of them. Harmonization of chemical management, which speaks to the establishment of chemical management systems that are consistent with established international regulatory agencies. strengthening of regulatory control mechanisms by accessing technical assistance from other reputable regulatory agencies, ensuring greater access to information on reasons for banning and restricting hazardous chemicals in other countries in order to improve decision-making regarding the importation of certain pesticides. And this information is critical to the decision-making process. It will be critical to the board as well. Identification of safer alternatives. And many times, sir, we act as though they're not alternatives, when in truth and in fact, and again, my colleague will bear me out on this because he has been using vinegar and other things on his lime trees. Accident management through the establishment of monitoring and reporting systems on pesticides poisoning. Information on poison incidents caused by pesticides and by extension other hazardous chemicals is important in the management of the chemical by a regulatory agency. And at present, there is no system on island that really gives us this. A toolkit developed by the convention can be utilized in order to start the function of such a system within the pesticides control unit. And so, sir, it is important that we have a fully functioning board under CAP 395. Mr. Speaker, the Rotterdam Convention sets out a number of recommendations that will form part of our management systems in Barbados. And they are perhaps going to be onerous at first, but it's something that we must do in order for us to bring Barbados into a 21st century existence and requirement. Such recommendations, sir, will be to revisit draft laws for the management of industrial chemicals in an effort to bring Barbados on stream for a more effective chemical management system. And these laws currently reside within the Environmental Protection Department, EPD. Establishment of Chemicals Committee to strategize the move towards management of industrial chemicals and facilitate further collaboration and communication between all entities involved. The responsibility of the Chemicals Committee will reside with the Environmental Protection Department as well. Continue to pursue the updating of current pesticides laws to ensure that the articles of the conventions are incorporated into law. Continue the assessment of the Pesticides Control Unit so that adequate resources, both human and other, are available to meet the requirements of the convention. And then commit to participation in the meetings of the conventions, which are held annually. Sir, these responsibilities, certainly, and these recommendations, we cannot take lightly. As I view the amendments, sir, to this bill, I wish to state and bring some clarity to what we are doing. And therefore, I would like to cite, first of all, that this bill would amend the Pesticides Control Act, CAP 395, primarily to change the composition of the Pesticides Control Board and to provide for a registrar of pesticides, and also to make amendments so that the Chief Agricultural Officer or his nominee will now be the chair of the Pesticides Control Board. Sir, the insertion of Section 38 in CAP 395 would have replaced what was in the old Act, so that the principal Act is amended by inserting Section 3 and the following functions are now created. The Registrar of Pesticides shall be the Secretary of the Board and shall perform such functions as are assigned to the Secretary by this Act and by the Board. B, be responsible for the general supervision of inspectors, because we will have to have an inspectorate in order for us to be able to carry out the management practices and making sure that people are not in breach. Give inspectors on behalf of the board such information, instructions, and directions as may be necessary for the operation of this act. Keep and maintain a register, as I alluded to earlier, to be called the Register of Pesticides in accordance with subsection 2, and perform such other duties as may be assigned by this act or by the board. Those changes, sir, are basically what we have done in order for us to be able to address many of the things that I spoke to earlier. Mr. Speaker, I want to now spend some time focusing on the sector, because I believe that if you're going to use a system which seeks to manage the use of chemicals, then we also have to speak to the objectives of the sector in order that Barbadians can have a fair understanding of what is taking place and what we're hoping to achieve. It's almost like saying where we are now, where we want to get to, and how we're going to get there. Mr. Speaker, I took to Cabinet a paper that looked at the overall performance of the agricultural sector in Barbados. And between the period January to June, we had a growth of 16% in the sector. Of course, this information was given to the print media and the electronic media, and was also on social media platforms. But sir, it will be remiss of me if I didn't use this opportunity to reinforce that we've had an agricultural sector at a time when the country was under severe pressure, at a time when most other sectors would have been facing challenges. We were able to eke out a growth of 16% between January to June of this year. And sir, that happened. Sir, that happened at a time when the country was also going through severe drought periods. And the drought periods this year were more prolonged than previous years. It just goes to show what is possible when one commits to achieving results. It is unfortunate, sir, that we cannot plan climatic conditions. We can only seek to put measures in place to mitigate. And sir, for the second half, we have had prolonged rainfalls like never before. These rainfalls we have had remind me also of the days when I was a boy growing up, when you would have had rain, heavy downpours, sometimes more than an inch on any given day. And in Barbados, in some cases, we recorded just above an inch in certain districts in Barbados, which really is on par with what obtained in the past. That, sir, contributed in large measure to many of the crops being damaged. Cucumbers, for example, and we all know that cucumbers are now carrying a higher price because of the scarcity. And of course, watermelons as well. And the ministry needed to respond to what is happening, because as I said, we can't determine We can look, we can do all types of modeling, and the Met Office has been doing a fantastic job, amazing work they have been doing in keeping Barbadians abreast of what is happening, bringing us real-time information and keeping us informed. As a matter of fact, they talked about radar that was down for almost 20 years has been fixed. And whilst it is not up to full calibration, we have been able to fix that radar, and the government of Barbados committed funds to making sure that we get all of the new replacement parts to give us a new radar in Barbados, which we didn't have for 20 years. That, sir, speaks to the serious manner in which one, and I have to emphasize this, and you would bear with me for so doing, because the phone calls that I get reinforce this point, that for the first time, we have a prime minister that has committed to the development of this sector in a way that we have never had it before. And the fact that she chose me as minister would mean that I also have to live up to the responsibility of making sure that we can deliver in order for us to be able to grow the sector. Sir, to manage what we are currently facing with floods, I think this has been talked about for perhaps over 2 decades as well, that we have to move to water harvesting in Barbados to capture some of the runoff water, which would otherwise flood fields and cause damage to acres upon acres of crops. And so, in this honorable chamber, we brought a supplementary for $5.9 million in order for us to create reservoirs in Barbados so that we can bring relief to the farmers going forward. And so that in 2021, we will now have reservoirs in Barbados. And mind you, sir, with proper management of the use of chemicals, reservoirs that will not have chemical residue. And that we are now going to establish reservoirs at River in St. Philip, and River in St. Philip has been talked about, Mr. Speaker, since Adam was a lad. And, sir, no relief has been brought to the farmers, again, for over 2, possibly 3 decades. And now, whilst I seek not to apportion blame, again, it will be remiss of me as minister to not really highlight to the public of Barbados the work we are doing to make sure we can bring relief to those farmers who are currently suffering severe flood conditions when we have extreme climatic conditions in Barbados. And the reservoirs, the process has already begun. There's a Stantec study that was done, I believe it was in 2010, and that study we are also using to inform the decisions that we are making. So that River, in 2021, when the rains come back, we will see dams at River to capture the water and to bring relief to the farmers so that they do not continue to lose their crops. We are also going to repeal the Three Houses Spring Act, which currently is perhaps over 100 years old. And in repealing that act, put a management structure in place for access of water coming downstream, so that all farmers would also have access to water coming from that stream. What currently happens is that you would find that there's damming taking place along the stream, and those further downstream don't get any water. And so you do not have an equitable distribution. But that, Mr. Speaker, sir, when we repeal the act, we would then make it easier for farmers to access water coming downstream by using sluice gates and a management system that would also obviously involve the Barbados Water Authority and the BADMC in order for us to be able to manage that effectively. The Riparian Act, as I understand it, allows for people who are living along the stream where the water actually passes along on their property to be able to dam for 48 hours, and in one instance for 72 hours as it related to Tree Houses Plantation. But in terms of all others, they were not allowed to either block the stream or dam water. But it has now become common practice for any and everybody to go and dam or block. And so we have to now put a proper inspectorate in place, empower the BADMC to act, and use a structured system where you will have sluice gates and an irrigated system going to farmers as well. So what would you have? You will have the streams still functioning, and equally the dams as well, to give a continuous supply of water, and we should reach the point where they will have now a year-round supply. But that the near river in itself speaks to exactly what it is. That when it rains, you get a river. So the entire area floods out. Now, I am pleased to note that even though we may not reach 100% perfection on this, that we are certainly going to transform what is happening there into an area where water can be harvested and crops can be saved. Farmers can continue to harvest, and that we all will be in a win-win situation. I have to say that I find, and the late Professor Right Honorable Wayne Arthur said to me at the Job and Investments Committee when I did a presentation on agriculture, and if I may use his words, Mr. Speaker, he said, "Young man, agriculture real hard. Agriculture is not easy. Agriculture is a major challenge. Pick the 4 winners. Pick the 4 winners. Work with those and build on that." And that is the exact approach I am taking as it relates to this sector in order for us to achieve the growth we need and keep people employed. Mr. Speaker, River will be a winner because when we are finished with the transformational work over there, then more farmers will come back, because what we have now is people leaving out of frustration. And they're leaving out of frustration because they understand that either they're going to be challenged with predial larceny or floods or prolonged droughts. It is not easy. And Mr. Speaker, this solution, sir, speaks to how serious we are as a government and speaks to how serious we are about empowering and enfranchising people. And I have to say to you that it is my fervent wish that more people will seek to take advantages of the opportunities that are available in agriculture. I saw a farmer in one of our dailies lament the loss of a field of watermelon. And I read it. I felt very sorry to hear. But he actually said the yield from that would have been $60 million. $60 million. And it's interesting because on another day in another conversation, perhaps if I had asked, what are you yielding from this field, I probably would not have been told $60 million. But to yield $60 million from one harvest of watermelon is a significant sum. And therefore, when now we move to Spring Hall Land Lease Project as well, which is a project which started under Minister of Agriculture at the time, would have been now Sir Richard Cheltenham. That project was created to also empower Barbadians, but also contribute to our food security. And that project basically had over 300 acres of land available to farmers in rural Barbados. And what has happened over time is that you will find that the wells have become completely clogged up. Dumping, illegal dumping, all types of activities taking place. And, Mr. Speaker, they too have been impacted by severe floods and would have lost large sums in crops that were flooded out when we experienced heavy rainfall. The dams will also be going to Spring Hall. And I am currently in conversation with a private sector entity to bring layers as well. They started off at, I think it was 10 or 15 million gallons. When I looked at the project that we are planning for layers, we have moved it to around 22 million gallons of water, and the work is also going on there. And Mr. Speaker, all these are in the throne speech. So this is the ministry actually starting to deliver on things that are in the throne speech. When we spoke about our legislative framework, sir, chemicals would form a great part of that legislative framework. Well, Mr. Speaker, we also spoke to how we will treat to the issue of predial larceny, because I can do, or my team and I, which is the way I prefer to express this, my team and I can do all the great things we want to do around chemicals and management of chemicals. Certainly, the environment will benefit, all Barbadians will benefit. But the downside to all of this is that whilst you may have more production, greater yields, predial larceny is an absolute problem. And Mr. Speaker, we are already in conversation with the CPC to make sure we have the legislation repealed. The Cabinet has already agreed to this. And that we will now be introducing technology, sir, that one, seeks to give farmers a chance to track their produce. And so the legislation that was passed in 2017 spoke of giving people receipts. We do not believe that receipts are an effective tool, because you can get all types of forging and copying of receipts, etc. And we have moved to certificates or barcodes that are driven by technology, which are not very easy to replicate. And so you would find that farmers now would have the protection of traceability through blockchain technology, where their crops can be traced from the field straight through to the end user or to the consumer. In there, sir, when you use your mobile phone in a supermarket or by a vendor's stall to check the barcode, you will know which farm it came from, when it was harvested, what chemicals were used, and you will have a tremendous amount of information before you. That, sir, makes it difficult for people who are stealing crops to be able to sell them unless people are prepared to encourage a black market system where crop theft is allowed to prevail. Now, Mr. Speaker, we are also working with the FAO to introduce tracking systems for animals through chips. And the FAO has committed through the TCP, Technical Cooperation Program, to be able to commit to Barbados at no cost to us. There is no cost at the back end either, so that our animals, we can do a mapping of all the breeding stock, all of the stock that we have in Barbados, and be able then to do a meaningful tracking right across Barbados of all the animals we have. So this helps us also to determine what chemicals were being used, But equally, if there are diseases, if you get an outbreak because of the chipping system, you're able to track faster where outbreaks are taking place than currently what obtains. So that the repeal of the bill that seeks to address predatory larceny will then put us then within a 21st century existence and bring greater protection for farmers in Barbados. Mr. Speaker, these are but some of the things we are doing at the ministry, because there are several others, including an entire restructuring of the Ministry of Agriculture, looking at posts that are relevant, posts that need to be changed to help bring them in line with what our objectives are. And we've already gone through the process with the consultant and will be ready to lay these before the cabinet. So that, Mr. Speaker, one pillar within that entire structure is how we manage chemicals and the treatment to the Pesticides Board, which also falls under the Ministry of Agriculture. And so, Mr. Speaker, I believe that these are absolutely necessary measures that we will need to put in place over and above the amendment that is taking place, and to help us then to see farmers have a better day and to bring agriculture in line with what is a 21st century requirement. And I've chosen not to speak to cotton and sugarcane and all of those, because the time will come for that. I am particularly focused on how we are creating a management system for chemicals within the sector and how people can benefit from being involved in agriculture. And so, Mr. Speaker, with those few words, I beg to move that this bill be read a second time.
Honourable Member Sir Michael West.
Thank you.
Turn your mic, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I listened with interest to what the Honourable Member for St. Philip South, Honourable Minister of Agriculture, presented to the Chamber this morning. What interested me more, though, was what he didn't say. And it is along those lines I would like to speak today. My father was a hard drinker. Mr. Speaker, he liked his alcoholic beverages. And he would drink daily. I've never seen him lying in the gutter. I've never seen him stumbling on the road. Indeed, after bouts of heavy drinking, he would still drive, and safely so, strangely enough. He died in his 90s. And he drank every day from the time I knew myself. And I've never seen him sick a day in his life, except for about 5 weeks before he actually died, when he suddenly took ill. And in his 90s, my father was very active and mobile, very vocal too, and would even sometimes go into Bridgetown using the ZRs. He died in his 90s, suddenly took sick one day, and lasted for about 5 weeks. Beyond that, father grew quiet in the early stages of those last few weeks. He was a very dark man. but his complexion seemed to become even darker. And on his skin, they broke out all kinds of welts all over his body. And I'm not here to suggest he died as a result of anything having to do with use of chemicals and pesticides. I have my suspicions on that, but that's not the point I really want to argue today. Because when we took him to the doctor, he was diagnosed with having another problem, which probably ultimately would have taken his life anyhow, in short order. But I do recall that just about 2 or 3 days before he took to his bed and assumed this very quiet disposition, company sprayed about the house on the outside, as we want to have them do from time to time. It is still my view up until this day, and based on much of what the doctor also said to us. Now, while he lay on his bed asleep, he ingested much of what was sprayed around the house on the outside. And the result of that was what you saw forming on his skin, and which caused him to take to his bed in the first place, even though in the course of examination subsequently, diagnosis of another problem that was given to us, and he died shortly thereafter. Say that to suggest to you, Mr. Speaker of the House, my concern in reference to the particular debate before us has more to do with the impact of the use, storage, and disposal of chemicals and pesticides in Barbados on human health, and also on our environment, than having anything to do with the administrative adjustments which this bill purports to make. These adjustments may be important, and maybe they will serve well to strengthen the institutional framework around the aims and objectives of the Ministry of Agriculture with respect to the management of the production and use and storage and disposal of chemicals and pesticides in Barbados. But I would have wished that I could have heard much more emphasis placed on that than on some of the other things I heard. I heard a lot of references to Basel, some people call it, Stockholm, and where else? Rotterdam. All these things are very important. I suppose we live in a world and we are part of that global community, and we subscribe to some of the institutional stipulations and the regulatory framework associated with those institutions. But I would have preferred to have had the honorable member spend a bit more time affording the House, the country, and myself some information with respect to the impact of the use and disposal of chemicals and pesticides in Barbados, how that impacts human health, how it impacts critical elements of our environment. Our groundwater is absolutely critical and important to us. In recent years, we have been having many growing number of complaints about discoloration of the water, serious discoloration of the water, even in the absence of temporary outages, which may impact the coloration of the water, even in the absence of heavy downpours, which again may impact the color of the water. We have had complaints, especially from rural Barbados, but not only in rural Barbados, parts of St. James Central, St. James South, even parts of what I call Upper or Northern St. Michael, with respect to discoloration of the water in Barbados. I wonder if the minister has any idea or to any extent, any knowledge as to the level of contamination of our groundwater induced by the use of chemicals and pesticides. Now, this to me is very important. We have protected water zones in Barbados. We have fairly firmly enforced laws with reference to those protected water zone areas. We have done so especially with reference to building and structural development, that is, the construction of buildings. But I wonder what is the level of collaboration and the level of scrutiny that obtains across ministries with respect to the matter of pesticides and chemicals used in farming and agriculture, and that impact upon the groundwater system in Barbados. I see farming operations either in what I believe to be protected water zone areas or quite near protected water zones in Barbados. And whereas we are fairly forceful in terms of how we apply the law with reference to protecting water zones from construction, I'm not too sure we are as diligent when it comes to the matter of agriculture. And I just wonder if anywhere in the Ministry of Agriculture, or if anywhere in the mind, in the head of the Minister of Agriculture, there's any idea, any knowledge as to the extent that agricultural efforts, agricultural pursuits, through use, disposal of chemicals, is impacting our groundwater system. That is seriously a concern of mine. And I raise that query. Hopefully I can get a response from the minister to that point as to the extent to which our groundwater is subject to threat as a result of chemicals used in agricultural production, agricultural activity. The minister himself referred to runoff water in Barbados. We know how the system works. We know how the flow works. There's a lot of water coming from the hills, running through the valleys, coming down and ending up along the coast and impacting our coastal and marine environment. Similar question, therefore, and I didn't hear the minister give any indication that there's any concern with reference necessarily to that or any high level of concern, even though he did mention how that flow operates and the fact that we lose a lot of water through the runoff that ends up in the ocean. But how is our coastal marine environment being impacted? That is obviously critical to our development. And it seems to be an increased level of consciousness and awareness on the part of this government as to the role that our coastal and marine environment can play in the development of Barbados, not only with respect to tourism appeal, but with respect, of course, to fisheries and other sorts of activity. But if we have this volume of water that is running out of the hills and fields and going through the gullies and ending up in our oceans, certainly there must be some degree of impact upon coastal and marine environment. We have been complaining, or expressing concern, I should say, about coral degradation and the decimation of our coral assets offshore from the island. And if we are that concerned, we really need to make sure that we are possessed of a high degree of certain knowledge as to the type of impact that is taking place on that environment. Seems to suggest that there needs to be a very high level of collaboration, coordination between the Ministry of Agriculture and the ministry responsible for coastal environmental matters in Barbados, whichever ministry that is. Sometimes we're not too sure, and there may be some overlap. But certainly there needs to be serious collaboration between these two ministries, because our coastal environmental assets are really significant resources upon which the island will find that it has to make greater reliance. And whatever degrades that environment degrades our value, if you understand what I'm saying by that. And whatever degrades that environment makes us a lot less attractive and appealing to those who come and visit. It's also less attractive and appealing to nationals and to residents, and has implications also for fisheries. And I am sure my friend at the far end, out of St. Michael South, would agree wholeheartedly with me on that matter, Mr. Speaker. Now, I mentioned a little bit about my own personal experience, my own personal sense of what befell, unfortunately, my father. But another area I would have wished the minister to have addressed, and I hope surely he would pay some attention to that, has to do with the protocols and prescriptions which we have in place, if any, with respect to the internal use of chemicals, the use of chemicals internally. We have heard loud expressions in one or two instances where people were very uncomfortable, certainly dissatisfied and disquieted over the fact that chemicals were used internally or used in their internal environment and impacted on them. I think this even happened at the QEH. I think the minister, while speaking, mentioned one particular chemical which has been mentioned to be of serious concern to many Barbadians. But what are the protocols, if any? What are the prescriptions which apply to the use of chemicals internally? We contract various cleaning enterprises to come into our various edifices, whether it's a church, whether it's a business house, whether it's the institution of parliament, and to do cleaning. But what level of attention is paid to the elements which constitute the materials used for cleaning, and what are their likely impact upon those who occupy those spaces? We are, Mr. Speaker, you know better than anybody else perhaps, in the process of doing some environmental cleaning and rearrangements in the Parliament of Barbados. But then that space still has to be maintained after those repairs are completed, and we make recourse back there. That place has to be maintained, it has to be cleaned. But what is being used to clean the place? And what is the likely effect that is having upon human system, especially upon persons who may have already existing ailments? I don't say these things, Mr. Speaker, simply to use words. I say these things because I consider them to be important. So we use them in the business place, in business space, and we use them around the properties of domestic dwellings. But are there proper prescriptions and protocols? Are cleaning enterprises, those who have pesticide, insecticide companies, chemical dispensing companies, are they governed by protocols and prescriptions based on studies and research which establish the soundness of what is used or the unwisdom of what might otherwise be used? Or is it left simply to management to determine what they use when they apply the chemicals to your property, Mr. Speaker. And in that case, that would be a lot of chemicals based on the size of the property. I imagine. I might be wrong, but I imagine.
I think you are rather wrong.
Rather wrong. I take that therefore back because I don't want ever be wrong with respect to yourself. But very seriously, is it left to the management of these companies to determine what they use? Is it left to their own internal research to determine what is used, what is healthy or otherwise not so healthy? Or is there a framework in which these protocols have been or are being worked on? I speak in this way because I believe that when we formulate policy based on that kind of thinking. Policy when it is prudent, an effective response to issues that are either already existing or are likely, potentially so, to exist. And therefore, it is out of that kind of a context that we have policy formulation. And the administrative changes that are being suggested may very well be prudent and necessary. I'm not debating that. I'm not arguing against that. I'm simply saying that when you get on the ground and you deal with existing realities or potential reality, especially when we talk about human health and the environmental health in which we all must live and work and survive, then we have got to be concerned with those types of things. Now, Mr. Speaker, poor black people in Barbados are exploited in more than one way. The honorable member for St. James Central, I am sure, will loudly agree with me. Poor black people in this country have been for long years and are still currently being exploited in several ways. It is not only when they are denied their day in court in a proper and convenient, I should say, and soon fashion or soon order. It is not only that. It is not only when they are not paid sufficiently for the work they do for capital private interests in Barbados. It is not only when their just and legally prescribed benefits are denied them and the unions must get up and make noise and quarrel with government and all of that and quarrel with the capital interests. It's not only in those contexts that poor black people in Barbados are exploited, but I wonder what is the situation on agricultural and farmlands in Barbados with respect to the level of exposure to which poor black people in Barbados are subjected because they are forced in their work to use chemicals and pesticides and other elements which may in fact be detrimental to their health. And as a serious concern, serious concern. I take the matter of exploitation of poor people. I take the matter of exploitation of poor black people by anybody or any business or any government or any entity, even the church. I take the exploitation of poor black people very seriously. And it still remains a scourge upon this national landscape that in 2020, that we still allow too much of that to be ongoing. But I know that there's a sufficient number of voices in this place and a sufficient number of spirits in this place that those matters will not continue to exist without being highlighted and being protested and being countered. And I want to know if there's any at all concern at any level in the Ministry of Agriculture or any other ministry, relevant ministry, as to what is befalling poor black people who work in agriculture on estates in Barbados and who have every day to use chemicals. Are they provided, and is it prescribed, and is it mandatory, and is the law enforced? Are they allowed to? Are they being allowed to protect themselves true use of protective gear? Is it something which falls into the realm of the subjective? It's what a farm or an estate provides. It is what a manager sees fit. It is what an estate can afford. Is it what the worker chooses to wear? The question of proper protective gear as you work in the context of agriculture, and especially if you deal with chemicals and pesticides, becomes an issue for me. It certainly is an issue for me. And I am sure that it would be an issue for my honorable friend out of St. Philip South as well. So my real point is simply to ask, what is the position and what is being done with respect to these matters? You see, for a long time, and coming from the bosom and the mouths of those who research and study these matters, it has been felt for a long time that there was a high level of concern, or that there needed to be a high level of concern about these matters, while they did at the same time express that there was very low capacity on the part of government and other institutions to respond to it. So you have high level of concern because groundwater is exposed, this is exposed, that area is exposed, this is a threat. There's a high level of concern in these matters, but a low level of capacity or capability to respond. And I think that therefore presents a disaster waiting to happen. Now, the recent goings on up at Lower Estate bring into focus again the need that we be vigilant and we be robust in dealing with matters of disposal of waste, especially waste that is highly chemically constructed, if you understand what I'm saying, composed. The event of a by-election brought this into focus again. It should not take such events. And obviously, there's a problem there, which government has committed to addressing in the shortest possible time. My understanding of the problem is that though there's no dumping going on there now, the fact that you've not properly sealed what was once a dump or used as a dump left persons exposed to various health threats and other discomforts as a result of chemicals still being able to reach them in the privacy of their homes. I'm simply saying, when it comes to the matter of disposal of toxic waste, contaminated waste, chemical waste, I do not know in a small space like Barbados that we can afford to be lax on that. And we've got to be very muscular on that. And I'm sure the Minister of Agriculture, Honorable Member St. Philip South, is of that disposition. Now, when it comes to those things, we have to be very muscular and robust. And there's some things that government might play a little with, if I might put it in that language. But there's some things that government absolutely cannot play with. And the disposal of chemical substances, toxic waste, is not something that we can let continue to happen in the dark of night, in the gullies of Barbados, and in the unseen spaces across this island, because it's persons like yourself, Mr. Speaker. I almost said fellas like you. Persons like yourself, Mr. Speaker, who at the end of the day fall prey and subject to those types. So while I'm on my feet, let me ask, because I have not heard, and I may have missed it, and I remember raising this in this house, in the other place, over a year and a half back, I think. And I think the Honourable Minister responsible then for energy, member for Christchurch East, was the point man on this. And it had to do with the cleaning up of the old mobile site at Bay Street. I don't know if that's a job that's done, but my understanding of the situation then was that it was something which was very urgent and that it was a massive public health disaster waiting to happen. And I'm just asking, what is the latest on that matter? I won't say any more than that today. but I certainly do genuinely ask that mobile site at Bay Street that constituted a threat because it was not properly secured and because that you were dealing with a massive load of left behind waste not properly disposed of pose a threat to the area immediately and by extension to the wider Barbadian community. And I haven't heard much or anything said about it since those days. Of course, being the kind of person I am, I will assume that it has been properly taken care of, and fully so, because we haven't heard anything more about it. But I just want to ask so that we might be told. And I thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, for giving me a hearing.
Honourable Member for Christchurch West Central.
Mr. Speaker, sir, first of all, let me congratulate and thank the Member of Parliament for St. Philip South. He said that he was, in his younger days, if you go back, I don't know how much years, was a cricketer of certain acclaim. And he said he was open batting, he made hundreds. But I want to say today what he presented before this August chamber was a garden grenades. It was full of technique and class at the same time. And I want to congratulate him for that. And I want to say that in this chamber, this August chamber, we have a number of cricketers. We have 30 cricketers in here. 30 cricketers. The Member of Parliament for Christchurch West, you're a spin bowler, although you're bowler googie. And the Member of Parliament for St. Philip South will play those later. Right back down the page. That metaphorically speaking, of course. But my point today, Mr. Speaker, is that we have a team of players. And a team in cricketing sense means together everyone achieve more. Even you, the Member of Parliament for St. Michael West. St. Michael West. But this is not like the chambers prior to 2018. You may have to revisit the song by the Trey Veins, Cricket in the Jungle. It was a facade. Mr. Speaker, I want to say to you that, and I want to thank the Member of Parliament for St. Philip South for correcting an anomaly or oddity as it relates to the board and the chairman and deputy chair as who should sit on the pesticide control board. But there's an anomaly which I would like to correct. An anomaly, an oddity that seeks to destroy the way of life, animal life and plant life. And that oddity is that as we seek to mitigate, and adapt to the vagaries of climate change, the oddity I speak today, Mr. Speaker, sir, is one that speaks specifically to the fact that in agriculture, and in terms of agricultural activities, this world is exposed to 30% of greenhouse emissions from that one industry. And that is something I would certainly like to speak to today. The reality, Mr. Speaker, is that fumigants that we use, fumigants in the agriculture industry, are 300 times more potent than carbon dioxide, which is a major greenhouse gas as we know it. And when we talk about climate change, and I know the Member of Parliament for St. Michael West spoke about the agreements that we are signatory to. We are also signatory to the Paris Agreement, or the Kyoto Protocol, which speaks to the fact that we have, along with the rest of the world, and I want to say today that as President of Latin America and the Caribbean, as it relates to the forum which will seek not only to bring a sustainable post-COVID response, but a green economic recovery as it relates to how we as small and developing states treat to the vagaries of climate change. And I want to say that we have to fight along with the Ministry of Agriculture, the Ministry of Maritime Affairs and the Blue Economy, collectively to reduce our greenhouse gases and the effect on the ozone layer. The reality is that temperatures have risen over the last 3 months and has staggered between 0.13 degrees Celsius and 0.17. Increases every day. That is why some days you have extreme heat and the next day is flash flooding. When these temperatures rise because of the greenhouse gas effect, Mr. Speaker, we know what happens to the ozone layer and the damage. The layer that protects this earth from the radars, the UV radars of the sun. And when it gets hot, another in a circular way, the cryosphere or the area that is responsible for the snow, that melts, giving rise to the effects that my good friend, the Minister for Maritime Affairs and the Blue Economy, the Member of Parliament for St. Michael South, will speak about later, is the increased rise of sea levels. 4 millimeters over the last year. Damage to the reef as we know it. Damage to the shoreline. I am saying, Mr. Speaker, sir, that we now have to look at other measures of controlling our pest. The pest is anything that can bring disease, can cause annoyance, it can change the basic ecological habitat. And that's what we are trying to control, those pests. So what I'm saying today, Mr. Speaker, as the minister responsible for the lithosphere, the environment of the earth as we know it, that, Mr. Speaker, that I have a responsibility to talk about the alternatives. And that is what I'm going to do today, Mr. Speaker. I am going to talk about the alternatives to the pesticides, the alternatives to the fumigants. That is what I'm here to talk about, because there are alternatives. It is what we call, in my ministry, biological diversity. That is what it's called. And that is what we, again, and the Member of Parliament for St. Michael West, you know, he's not only in earshot, but he's in eyeshot as well. We are also signatory to CITES, which is the Convention on International Trade of Endangered Species. Those species that are endemic to Barbados, we have signed in 1992, the 117th country that signed on to this convention, which speaks to the way how we protect our world, fauna and flora, the plants and the animals. But not only are we protecting them because they are endemic, and as you alluded to, remember Parliament for St. Michael West, that we are signatory to international conventions, but they are an essential part of our biological ecosystem management. Mr. Speaker, I really want to speak not only of animal control, but I will speak about plant control as well as it relates to biological management and ecosystem management. Mr. Speaker, there is a threat of African snails. Everybody in Barbados knows it. African snails is a big problem. And a long time we have used all types of chemicals to seek to control these snails. And there are broad categories of chemicals that we don't only control snails, but pests. You will hear about the organic phosphates, the carbamates, all those fancy things, the malathion, they're controlling the mosquito with the malathion and the kerosene oil. You have heard about those chemicals. But the adversity about using those chemicals, DDT, which is the organochloride, is now being completely banned in all countries, including Barbados, so we don't have to worry about that. But one of the things about these chemicals is that they produce hydrocarbon, which can naturally mix with the oxygen in our free oxygen in the atmosphere and foreign carbon dioxide, the leading greenhouse gas. That is the problem. What I'm saying is that there are biological ways to control these pests. And I just mentioned the African snail. Mr. Speaker, sir, a simple thing, and a lot of persons in here like to make omelette on mornings, scrambled eggs, and they have gardens outside, organic gardens. What you can use, Mr. Speaker, is these same eggs, decorate your garden with, and there are a way of controlling the African snails from going in the garden bed in a natural way. And along with, and I know they have all types of creativities, because Barbadians are creative people. Along with putting the eggs down, the egg shells down, I am sure you can find a creative way to enhance the beauty and aesthetic of your garden. That is a way of controlling without using chemicals. Another way, and I have an organic garden at home, and I can tell you, I have African snails all over except in the garden space. You know why? Mr. Speaker, something as simple as planting garlic along the hedge, the strips. Garlic stops the African snails from venturing into the garden. Parsley, thyme, these things you can use around even sawdust, because a lot of carpenters in Barbados, they don't know, putting sawdust in areas of lining around the garden, helping to beautify the garden, also keeps away the African snails. Some farmers use copper metal chopper sheets around the plants, and it works. Even charcoal, although I'm not encouraging anybody to be burning fire, no, but charcoal that you buy from the remnants of wood fire can be put in your garden to help control the African snails. These are important ways, and these are things that Barbados, these are simple things that you, and when you're talking circular Barbados, these are things that you have at home already. And when you talk about the whole thrust of the five R's, reduce, reuse, recycle, recover, and no repair. Because as a young man, we used to repair bicycle tires, they just shouldn't make them. That's what we have been talking about. And if you're serious about Barbados and we hope you are going to take Barbados, we must be able to get full purchase for everything we use. And that is the simple conversation I want to have. We have a problem with mosquitoes. And when everybody and my colleagues heard me talk about my favorite, the leaf-toed gecko or the Philodactylus pulcher. Everybody says, Medic, you're going with this. But the bottom line, Mr. Speaker, is that these lizards that we see, and I heard the member Parliament for St. Philip South said that lizards scare certain fear sets. I don't know. I had a son with sparrows say otherwise. The reality, Mr. Speaker, sir, is that these lizards that people will seek to destroy, they are endemic to Barbados. They are known for this country. They are an endangered species now, as I speak. They are part of our biological diversity and our ecosystems. They help to manage that which is a pest, as we know it. You know what they do, Mr. Speaker? A mosquito can lay an egg on a branch, on a leaf, and that egg can live 10 years, survive the test of times until the conditions are right to hatch. You know what these lizards do? They eat the eggs. They eat the larvae. Biological control. They are responsible for eating a lot of the insects that we are spraying the pesticides to control. And along with that, if they are properly cared and nurtured, we can get back to the numbers so that we can recognize in Barbados that we have done our bidding not only as a country, but as part of our international commitment in terms of endangered species. The leaf-toed gecko. That is what I'm speaking about today in terms of our biological control, because we have all of the animals and the insects to help control the problem that we have, and the Minister of Health would not have to tell Barbadians that we have 200 and 300 cases of mosquitoes. I heard the Member of Parliament for St. Philip South spoke about the polywows, the good old Bajan frog. When people hear me talk about these things, they say, Minister, we are going with it. But you know what it is about the frogs too? Again, they're responsible for eating a lot of larvae, a lot of small insects that are causing problems. And they are also responsible in the water base and the stagnant water to get rid of our mosquito larvae population. Before COVID, before COVID, Mr. Speaker, mosquito deaths were the #1 in the world in terms of vector-borne illnesses. 2 million people die per year of mosquito-borne illnesses. 2 million. COVID hasn't killed that much so far in a year. So the mosquitoes still running the Usain Bolt moment. They're still #1 in terms of the deaths. But we have to look at biological controls. And they will ask the question, when last we saw a dragonfly? When last? You know what dragonfly do? They eat the adult mosquitoes. Dragonflies have a voracious appetite for mosquitoes. So when you see the dragonflies flying around, nowadays you don't see any. This is what we call biological control. The Minister of Health would not have to get trucks fogging all over Barbados if we take some interest and time looking at our biological ways of controlling these things. You heard the Minister and the Member of Parliament for St. Philip South spoke earlier about the pink middiebug. You know what is a natural biological control for the pink middiebug that seek to destroy a lot of our plants? The ladybird beetle. When people years ago, your grandparents would say, if the ladybird beetle lamp on your skin is good luck. But he want a lot of good luck in Barbados because it will save us from the peak Millibug. I know you're the lucky fellow, Mr. Speaker, sir, you will a lot in your constituency, not only for good luck, but to help control that which is causing a lot of problems. These are called biological and natural methods of controlling our pests. And if you are serious about the country going forward, we have to be serious about the way how we lend our support to these natural things. And Mr. Speaker, sir, there are a lot of plants that we use together in an organic farm or an organic space that have a symbiotic function and approach. They work together. One may have a root structure that runs horizontal, the next may run vertical for different reasons. The minister is now talking about vetiver grass on the side of the highway. Whether it's vetiver or land grass, because of the horizontal root network, it is able to protect the land from eroding. Soil erosion. These are the things and types of conversations we have to have as a country if we are serious about reducing our carbon footprint and at the same time ensuring the integrity of our biodiversity and our ecosystems. The monkeys, we call invasive species, again, they're not only the best seed distributors in the world, but they're also responsible for eating a lot of little insects that wreak havoc. I agree, I have to control them, and that's what we are doing along with the Ministry of Agriculture, because we provide the science. So that there will be wanton behavior as it relates to culling, and everything is done in a scientific way, where we can control the amounts. That's why I'm saying to persons who are involved in illegal dumping into our gully and our ecosystems, that this is what is causing our natural biodiverse species to move from their natural environments and go into domesticated spaces. But we have to be able to control, and as the minister responsible for the environment, I, along with the Minister of Agriculture, we'll be looking at alternative methods of controlling our pests without having to use these harmful and toxic substances and components. But, Mr. Speaker, we are signatory. We are signatory, as the Member of Parliament for St. Michael West alluded to the Rotterdam Convention, which seeks to control our pesticides and the harmful pesticides. But there's a reason. There's wisdom in it. They are able to give a lot of technical and financial support, and them along with a lot of conventions, so that we are able to augment our policies here locally. And as it relates to our natural conservation and ecosystems and ecosystem management. And my simple conversations with Barbadians today is that we have almost everything at home around us to help manage our pests and help to control our pests. I am sure if every single Barbadian can get a lavender tree and put in their homes, the smell of the lavender tree is able to use as a natural mosquito repellent. Lavender, rosemary, the basil as we know it. And your old grandmother would often take the soursop leaves and split them for the scent and put in the house as a deterrent for mosquitoes. These were natural things. There's also the citronella plant, but unless the leaves are broken, that it really don't make no sense. But these are the things in terms of our biological control. Years ago, I'm now asking the NCC, which I have responsibility for, to start looking at mass producing these things so that every single Barbadian can have a rosemary tree at home, a lavender tree at home. We can sensitize persons about the use of basil. Those things that are responsible for naturally protecting us from these harmful species. This is the way we have to go if we are serious as a country, not only to achieve what the Minister of Agriculture is trying to achieve, but to also save our ecosystem and help manage it. Sometimes we often refer to ourselves as funambulists. We have to walk the tightrope sometimes. If you're serious about a country, we have to walk that tightrope. As the minister said, the minister responsible for agriculture said, sometimes you have to manage it, balance it between the effect of getting something done within a space of time and the labor and the other alternatives that you have. But we have to start somewhere. And I'm saying today, and I'm making a clarion call to Barbadians, that we have to start looking at biological methods of controlling our environment. We understand the problems as it relates to the greenhouse effect. We understand the vagaries and the challenges of climate change with hurricanes and natural disasters, what is happening in the whole town. Every single time it rains, we get flooding. We understand, as the minister alluded to, the problems as it relates to our water supplies. And if you get chemical infiltration because of these pesticides and chemicals we are letting in the atmosphere. And that is why, again, I am raising my vocal cords in here in an unshackled way to tell Barbadians that the scourge of illegal dumping will not be the grange that destroys my Christmas. Not as long as I have breath, as minister responsible for the environment. We have to get clean in this country. There is no sense. I spoke about the trailblaze earlier. There is no sense of having an iconic song called Beautiful, Beautiful Barbados by the Merry Men, and Barbados remain like this. It makes no sense. We must not only have an iconic song representing how beautiful our country is, it must be the new way of life. That's what it must be. It must be a philosophical change to the environment. And that will help the Minister of Health with all the problems as it relates to mosquitoes, because it is those illegal sites, those indiscriminate use of garbage disposal, the wanton behavior of throwing bottles in the air. The member of Parliament for Michael South, the Minister of Maritime Affairs, and the Blue Economy will talk about his success in terms of reducing the amount of bottles and the containers that are not degradable. He will talk about this because that is the perfect habitat for mosquitoes to multiply and breed. And these are the type of conversation we are going to have as a country, because the only way we are going to achieve success in the fight against the pesticides and maintaining our relationships with the outside world as it relates to our NDCs, national determined contributions that we are going to be telling the international world. As a leader in the small island development state, this is what Barbados is doing to contribute to our reduction in greenhouse gases. 1 million trees, we will reduce our carbon footprint by 48 million pounds. 48 million pounds. That's what we will be telling our international community. The reality is that every year we produce, as a small country, 2 million tons of carbon dioxide. Too much for small geographical space. So we have to start with every little child. And that's why when little Maria, that beautiful little girl, she says, small thoughts on big matters, it's big thoughts on big matters as far as I'm concerned. When she told Orlando Bloom, I want to help be a fighter for the environment. I want to be a champion. I want to tell those persons who are involved in illegal dumping to stop. That's what she's saying. Stop. The book of Isaiah, and I know the half-pious individuals in here will tell you that a little child shall lead them. So if Maria has the fortitude to say stop, every single Barbadian should be saying stop. I don't mind the little children in this country being the active players. In this whole fight, I don't mind. Because I follow the virtues of the Bible as well. A little child shall lead them, Isaiah. The reality, Mr. Speaker, is that we have a problem in this country as it relates to illegal dumping. The minister has brought measures to control our pesticides. We are saying that we are serious about reducing our carbon footprint. And we are saying as a government that we will not walk in front of the good people of this country because they may not follow. We will not walk behind, and verbally they may not lead. We will walk by their side as a partnership with the people of this country, because we understand that partnership is an important cog in this whole Sustainable Development Trust. And the only way that we can have a better, cleaner Barbados and greener Barbados is that we have every single Barbadian committed putting their hands to the plow in unison in this fight, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm obliged.
Honorable Leader, Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think that is a good place for us to break for lunch, and therefore I beg to move that the sitting be suspended until 1:45 p.m.
The question is that this honorable chairman be suspended until 1:45 p.m. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. All those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. This honorable chairman stands suspended until 1:45 p.m.